Hello students, this is Dr. Winkler again. I believe I'm recording. A little hard to tell. I am. It's a pleasure to meet with all of you. I would like to tell you it's a pleasure to see everybody, but unfortunately I can't do that. However, I'm with you in spirit and in this recording. As I've already mentioned, this is Dr. Winkler again. This is the second lecture of the Ancient Civilization course. Let me talk a little bit about where we're at. Remember, we were discussing how human beings interact with their environment. That's one way you can call technology is how people interact with their environment, how they manipulate their environment to make the world better. Well, in this case, I talked about the Paleolithic, remember the old Stone Age, and the new Stone Age, where you have different kinds of stone. We have polished stone that gives you your ability to use your tools a little bit more effectively. However, the hallmark of the Neolithic is not just stone, but it is also, very importantly, the domestication of plants and animals. Last time we were having a great time as I was discussing the domestication of very important animals. Do we like dogs? Yeah, people like dogs. Many millions of dogs live in the United States, and many people find the dogs to be very compassionate. One of my interests is the wars and what it does to men psychologically. I remember reading an autobiography of a man who had been over in Iraq. He's suffering psychologically from that experience. He said, I just can't take it anymore. I just cannot take it anymore. So he went and got his gun to kill himself. He said he physically put the gun in his mouth to blow his brains out. When he did that, his dog came up, whimpering, and licked his hand. The dog knew what he was doing. Because of this experience, the guy did not kill himself. He said, well, the dog still needs me, or somebody still loves me. Then I have the opportunity to survive. I remember reading about another woman. There was a man. I remember reading about a woman. And she said that there was a death in the family, her mother died or something. She's on the bed and she's crying her eyes out. And her little doggy hops up on the bed, comes over and puts his paw on her arm to comfort her. I believe higher animals, including dogs, do have a sense of understanding when people are suffering. You could imagine with animals like that how well dogs were accepted in human communities. Now, where I'm at in this discussion, I am discussing the pig. And once again, I said last time, pigs are where it's at. I love pigs. Never owned a pig. Don't know what you do with a pig. But you go to state fairs and county fairs and you pet them. And what's really fun is when you pick up the little baby pigs and they squeak, squeak, squeak. And I don't know why I care. But they're a lot of fun. I think pigs got class. I used to have a pig collection. Unfortunately, I ran out of places to put a whole bunch of little plastic pigs. So I had to, shall we say, discard. Well, I never did discard them. I took them over to savers so they could be circulated again. But I like pigs. I like pigs a lot. Pigs are such a large animal, they don't make good house pets. However, then there's the cat, also known as the house cat. You need to get a house cat up here for your viewing pleasure. Let's get a house cat up here. Not a horse, on a house cat. Here's a pretty cat. When I was a kid, we had a dog. We had cats. We were irresponsible cat owners. So one time we had like 13 cats. That's irresponsible. It's way too many. House cats. Where did house cats come from? As you look at their genome, look at their DNA, the modern house cat is largely related. It has more than one origin, but it's somewhat related to the Middle East, places like around Anatolia, which you and I would call modern Turkey. The oldest found cat corpse buried with a human being, was found on the island of Cyprus. So we go to Cyprus here. Cyprus, not Cyprus Credit Union, Cyprus, the island. Should we get an image of it? Eastern Mediterranean. Now, apparently there's no way for a cat to really develop, shall we say, or evolve, if you will, on the island itself. So it had to be brought there by somebody. And if you like cats, and I like cats. What good is a cat? Well, cats are comforting and they purr and they sit on, if you got a good lap cat, they sit on your lap and do fun little things and they play with balls or whatever. Now let's look at the Eastern Mediterranean here. Cyprus is right there. There's really no way for a cat to get there unless a person brought them. So the modern cat developed largely in this area, we do believe. And they've been around for a long time. Well, cats are comforting, the cats are nice. But in reality, cats will do something else for you. They're very good at taking out rodents. They're very, very good in taking out mice. Cats will keep mice away. Sometimes you've had a good mouse or a good cat that's good in catching mice. Sometimes the local mice will come by and say, I ain't going that place. I see that cat and I don't want to die. So the cats have a very practical value. However, cats are very independent. They're very hard to train. I went to a circus a year or two ago. I was stunned. They actually trained cats to do tricks. I didn't know that was possible. Now, they weren't the same kind of tricks dogs can do, but they could jump over things, and you get the kitty cat to get on his hind legs. It was really quite fun. But you're not really using them on the hunt. And they do comfort you somewhat, but you're using them for rodent control. They're so independent, I used to say, you know something? I'm not sure we ever domesticated the cat. The cat might have domesticated us, but I'm not sure we really got the cat. Years ago, I went on a trip to Chicago for some history convention or something like that. And I'm so modern, I sit in a hotel room, turn on the TV. And I like local newspapers, so I'm reading the Chicago newspapers. And there was an incident with a cat. Somebody got a cat, a wild cat, and brought it into their house. Thought, well, just pet it, and it's a house cat. Well, that's not true. In fact, it attacked a small child. It didn't kill the kid, but kind of scratched him up. So there's only certain kind of cats that actually are very good, wild cats, I should say, that you can actually use for a house cat. And it's very helpful if you, with selective breeding, you choose a cat that's a good mouser. You also choose a cat that's not going to tear up the kids. So there is some selectivity going on to domesticating the cat. The goat, we don't usually drink much goat's milk nowadays, but in the ancient world they did drink a lot of goat's milk. We don't eat goats much either. That's still commonly done in places like the Middle East. It is a major food source, particularly in the ancient world. But it's not so much where you and I live. The modern goat is not the wild goat. The Bezor goat is something that people took and, once again, selective breeding, were able to turn into the modern goat. The sheep. We eat the food, the sheep meat, and it's called mutton. I've only had mutton once that I know of. I happened to be in Paris. The flight was, hello. There was the fear of an airline strike. In France, one thing you did not want to have is a 747 sitting on the tarmac, but you can't move it because of their airline strike. So when we were trying to get on the plane, I remember looking over and watched our 747 take off empty for the United States. So I'm going, well, groovy. Spent a day in Paris. Unfortunately, I didn't go downtown. Unwise. I don't care what it costs. I should have taken a cab and gone downtown Paris, but I didn't do that. Any event, I had dinner at the hotel. They put us up in the hotel. I had mutton. not terribly flavorful, but a lot of people eat mutton. Sheep is important for mutton, for sheep meat. It's also important for wool. Wool can be woven into cloth. It's very durable. Yeah, this thing wears like iron, literally. When I was in the Navy Reserves, our blue dress uniforms were made out of wool. I didn't like them. Scratched, itchy. You wear 2 or 3 t-shirts, it still scratches and it still itches. Why would the Navy force you to wear these things? One of the reasons, of course, was they're durable. But something else about wool. If you get wool wet, it actually releases a small amount of heat. Now, I don't recommend you experiment this way, but if you're ever North Atlantic, let's say up by Iceland, and you fall off your ship into freezing water, well, the weight of your uniform is probably going to drag you down anyway. If you go into the water, it will release some heat. So it's very helpful. So what are we eating? We eat the pig, we eat the goat, we eat the sheep. You and I, like modern society should say, we eat cattle. We eat beef. It's a very favorite kind of food. Once again, cattle, going back to Neolithic, developed from aurochs, whatever that is, about 8,000 years ago. Let's take a look at transportation. Remember I talked about the Paleolithic? When you go from point A to point B, there's only one way to do it, that's to walk. Of course, later in the Neolithic, you do invent the cart, and you get your husband to pull the cart. That does happen. Actually, one thing we forget before we got into industrialization, before we had trains and automobiles, machinery that would move us around, the dogs were actually draft animals. You can actually take a small cart onto a large dog, and the dog can pull it around for you. Can we say a horse, however, is much more efficient than a dog? And there's no doubt about that at all. Bigger animal, horses from wild horses. They were domesticated about 6,000 years ago. Wild horses, as you know, have an attitude. They kick your fanny, among other things. They don't like you very much and they run away. You got to catch that animal. You got to figure out how to break that animal. And somebody had a lot of guts the first time they did this. Somebody hopped on and held on for good old life until, as the animal is trying to buck him off, until the animal realized that it's not, that person is not coming off, and therefore they can be used now to guide and used as a draft animal. But now you have the ability to move without being on foot. Donkey related to the horse. Domesticated, all about the same length of time. Now you notice what I'm saying here, horse, donkey. Are you familiar with zebras? Zebras are down in Africa. Why don't I have zebras on this? You know, we never domesticated the zebra. It looks like a horse, doesn't it? You all know what a horse looks like. You all know what a zebra looks like. I have to believe it was tried. It's the problem with zebras. They bite you. Can't you breed that out? Well, you try. They still bite you. They don't like you. For whatever their proclivities are as an animal, they have problems as far as domestication is concerned. So I believe they were tried, failed. Try the horse and the donkey. Now we have the ability to move. Now, a lot of the animals that we're talking about in domestication are in the Middle East. We'll talk about Iraq, Iran, Mesopotamia, those areas in just a little while. But these are dry areas. Yeah, the rivers rise and they flood and there's problems, but there are a lot of dry areas. There's not a lot of water nearby. The camel is an extremely important animal because the camel can go long distances without much water. I remember reading about them. Their urine actually has a lot less water in it than the urine from a lot of different animals. So the animal itself has a strong ability to go long distance without water because it uses less water and has the ability to have more water, save more water within the body. We see what we can do now with mobility. The horse is fast, the donkey, a little bit cheaper. One thing nice about the donkey is it doesn't eat as much as the horse. So it's a lower maintenance. It's not going to pull as big as a load or carry big as a load, but it's going to have a good opportunity of moving around relatively cheaply. But the camel, oh my golly, the camel. Long distances, many miles, sometimes for days in a hot, dry climate without much water. We're getting a little bit closer to our time frame now. We got the chicken. Let's talk a little about efficiency of animals. Go up here a little bit. If you have, unless you have what we call free-range animals, in other words, without eating grass, but if you're feeding them grain, for every pound of beef you get, let's go to our cattle right here. For every pound of beef you get, that takes about 10 pounds of grain. Now that's not terribly efficient. Let's go to the pig. For every pound of pork you get, pig meat, it takes about 5 pounds of grain. Well, that's a little bit better than beef, but let's go down and look at chicken now. Chicken, poultry, that includes turkeys. As you know, turkeys actually was domesticated or started out in the Americas, so it's not really part of this course. But the chicken has been around for a long time, and a chicken is more efficient. A chicken, for 1 pound of chicken, takes about 3 pounds of grain. Do you see advantages? 10 pounds for beef, 5 pounds for pork, 3 pounds for chicken. So if you want to eat meat cheaply, chicken's a pretty good idea. Chicken from jungle fowl, yeah. How many birds do we use to domesticate and eat? There's about 10,000 species of birds on this planet. We have a few things like pets, like parakeets. Is that important? Not really for survival. They're kind of cute and they fly around. I like birds. They're cute. But an animal that we can really use is like chicken and turkey. There's not much else. Once again, some people, probably for generations, lengthy period of time, were able to hone in on an animal you could use. Notice what's happening several thousand years to make the great advances. I already told you when we were talking earlier about my love for the pig. That you go see them at county fairs or see them at state fairs. They have animal displays there. That's why I go. There's the pigs. But you go there and what do you see? You see sheep. You see cattle. You see pigs. You see chickens. You see, every time I go to a fair and see these animals, I'm saying I'm going on a Neolithic field trip because these animals were domesticated during the Neolithic. Well, since this time frame, since Roman time frames, our contributions have been pathetic. What have we developed in the last couple of thousand years? The guinea pig, the laboratory rat. There's really not much. Just a handful of species that became available makes possible so much of our food and transportation resources. Now let's say you had a few acres of land, hectare or whatever, and you were deciding how can we support as many people as possible on that agricultural sector. We have a choice between animals, like cattle, or sheep that graze. Or we can go out and we can get grain, and we can grow grain and we can eat the grain. Grain is enormously more productive. One study I read, I hope I got my numbers right, that one way or another, you'll get almost 10 times as many people living off of an acre of land using cereal crops than you are going to use that acre of land to grow animals. Therefore, we have to conclude that though we're domesticating plants and animals, it's actually the plants that are the most important as far as food resources are concerned. Agriculture, right here. Probably women. Once again, nobody's there with a camera to see exactly what's happening. But remember, we believe in these early societies that are moving around. The men are out hunting animals or snaring rabbits, whatever. And the women are looking for vegetable sources. I remember reading this about some of these people, these anthropologists living down in the Kalahari with the Ka'ung, also known as the Bushmen, South Africa. And unless you're in really, really good shape, it's hard to keep up with the men because these guys run for a living. They can really go long distances. So there's a tendency for anthropologists to hang back and kind of hang around with the women. And it's remarkable. They're saying these women are walking along and there's dirt, right? The women are walking along, look around going, oh, yeah, right there. The other women go, oh, yeah, there it is. The anthropologists go, what? You go over. They grab their stick and dig out and they pull up tubers, some kind of thing that you could probably cook and eat. And it blows people away. It just looks like ground to them. So you ask the women, well, how do you know? It's, oh, you can tell. You can see right there. See, what these women are doing is really very, very impressive. I'm going to say it's almost incredible, the kinds of things they can do. If anybody is more closely associated with plants, it will certainly be the women and not the men. Well, how did it happen? We don't know. It could have been something like this. Remember, these people have a tendency to move around. They know where to be at certain times of the year because that's when the food resources are available at that time of year. And it could be something like this. We're on this field and so some kind of grain growing there. We got our little hand size. You grab the grain up here and you kind of saw it off down here. And then we went over and we smashed it and made some kind of a mash or some kind of a flour and made something related to bread. You remember Mabel? Mabel says, yeah, Henrietta. Remember we were right here last year? Do you remember? My husband, that guy's an oaf. He spilled a whole bunch of grain right there and we couldn't pick it out of the dirt. She says, yeah, the guy is kind of uncoordinated. But you remember, the grain was right there. And now what do we see right there? We saw these things grow up. So what? Somebody might have said, I don't need this grain. I got a handful of grain right here. Put it down and let's come back next year and see what happens. However this took place, there was extraordinary insight in doing this. The idea that you could plant and return, I said that wrong, that you could plant a seed and it would grow into a new plant is the most extraordinary insight, because even though people have been using grains for thousands of years, when somebody came up with the realization that you can plant and grow plants, then you have the possibility of domestication of plants, then you have the beginning of agriculture, which is extremely important in the development of civilization. It's kind of an interesting story about this. There is a grain called emmer. I just call it emmer. I don't know why I do. And that's the way I first heard it pronounced. Oh, that's helpful. I remember I said I'm from Tooele, and we used to have these things out in the backyard. They grew wild. It was a kind of wheat I knew it was. I had no idea what it was called, but this is emmer. Emmer is edible, it certainly is, but notice it has a few small problems with it. It has these trails on them. The idea is obviously the thing can be dispersed in the wind. So you take a head of this, and I've done this before, you take a head of it and kind of put it in your hands, and then you have all these little grains, and they go all over the place. You can eat them. I don't remember ever popping it in my mouth, but you can eat them. But they're not terribly efficient for a domestic plant. However, there's a kind of a goat grass. Doesn't look like wheat at all to me. And it's goat grass. Okay, it's got its seeds on it. Doesn't look much like wheat. Now you can imagine over the thousands and thousands of years that the cross-pollination between emmer and goat grass probably gone on a long time. Usually when that kind of thing happens, you might have a new plant. But since these plants aren't closely related to each other, the new plant will be sterile. In other words, it won't be productive in any real sense. It won't be able to replicate itself. Apparently at some point, thousands of years ago, there was a small mutation in one of the genes. But when this came together, that the hybrid was actually not sterile, the emmer and goat grass, and you get bread wheat, which you and I are familiar with because we eat a lot of it. Let's see if we can. Oh, I don't want to look at bread. I want to look at the wheat. Wrong place. You rats. It's good for you. Good fiber. So we can get a plant up there. Okay. This is why you see growing in various places. Out by Lehigh, there's a lot of bread wheat growing out there at various times of the year. There's winter wheat. I know you know there's winter wheat and there's summer wheat. They're slightly different. One is a harder kernel than the other one is. But for our purposes, let's just take a look at these things. Now, there is an advantage to this. Obviously, it's very edible. And it does have a tendency to fall down. It doesn't spread like emmer does. Emmer just goes in the wind. It kind of goes in clumps. So if you're a Paleolithic person, you're running around and you want some pretty good grain to eat right now, and it's in clumps, it's a very, very big advantage. So you get it right there. And then obviously if you have the foresight to plant and you come back, and later on you're going to see that this is very efficient. So now you get bread wheat. Bread wheat is enormously important. If you look at what we eat, I know I've already made a big deal about animals, but when you actually talk about what we eat wheat in bread, we eat it in cookies and cakes and pasta. Many years ago, there was a restaurant in Salt Lake City called Dee's Family Restaurant. It said 100% pure ground beef. That's what went into the hamburgers. Later on, they don't say that anymore because we eat a lot of grain in our hamburger right now. And the beef we get, or pork, or chicken for that matter, comes from grain as well. So directly and indirectly, we are eating a lot of wheat. We eat it all the time. Remember they said bread is the staff of life? Yeah, from wheat. Now, barley is grown as well, but mostly wheat. And you harvest the wild wheat, which I've already mentioned. You harvest it, but later on you plant and return. Going back to my supposition, which I have no way of proving, that somebody threw something in the ground and said, let's come back and take a look at it later on. But you do plant and return. Now, as population grows and the area becomes drier, as you all know, the Middle East, since the last glaciation, several thousand years ago, has gotten drier and drier. When you get drier and drier, then you don't have the vast seas of grain. You have them closer to water resources and closer in clumps. If you plant and return, you're looking forward to a place that now where you can get something to eat. What if you come back and it's not there? What can happen? Well, the rabbits come in, birds come in, a few deer come in, and you come back and you don't have anything. When you begin to get pressed for food resources, it becomes a little bit better off at times to say, wait a minute, it is worth our effort to stay here and protect our plants so that we will have a harvest when they become available at the end of the year. When you settle, now you have the opportunity to change society dramatically. And now you can have the step towards civilization. Before I get into that, let me talk a little bit more about the sophistication of society in the Neolithic. I mentioned something about the toolkit. Remember, you have a toolkit in the Paleolithic. You make a few things, you carry it around with you. Another reason why you can't have a large number of kids, because you got to carry your toolkit. You also have to carry your food with you, and the child becomes an additional burden. Sometimes you cannot afford. But if you're in a sedentary society, if you're sitting in one place, you have a much better opportunity now to have a toolkit that you can take with you. Excuse me, I said that wrong. You don't have to carry it with you. You can have it there. And the sophistication of tools starts to grow up. Now, I'm not saying during the Paleolithic that there was not advances in the toolkit, because there was. But when you have a sedentary society, your tools become quite more sophisticated. You get more of them. And this is not supposed to be a complete list, but let's take a look at them. Can we say one of your more well-received implements is the stick? Okay. Well, you take a stick and you put, let's get a hole up here for you. I was such a lazy kid. Yeah, we had a garden in the backyard. Dad would try to get me out there with a hoe to dig the weeds, and you know how it is. You try to figure out a way of getting out of it. I haven't seen a hoe for a long time. I don't know if people have gardens much anymore or not. But it's just a hole. It's a stick. It would be stone. It's got a blade on it. You tie it on, and you use it to kill the weeds. It's something you don't need with you moving around, but if you're tending plants, you need the hoe. The plow this time frame is kind of, we call it the scratch plow. It's just a stick that you drag through the ground. Sometimes you can grab it with your hands and pull it on through. A hoe works to a certain extent. The trouble with the hoe is it's hard to drag at long distances. If you have a plow, then you can pull it, harness your husband, or if you're rich and you can use a donkey, that's even better. But you pull it through the ground. It's just a stick. Now, if it's a more sophisticated kind of plow, you might have a small piece of stone on the end of it so it cuts through the ground a little bit more efficiently. Scythes, give you a scythe up here. Let's get a scythe. Maybe I can't get you an ancient one. Yeah, these are pretty sophisticated ones. The original scythe is just a stick with a small blade coming off of it. And once again, I mentioned this when you're harvesting the grain, you kind of hold the head of the wheat in one hand and you saw it off with the other one, or you could push it off. Now these are ones that use it two-handed, like this lady is using right here, which you can swing a little bit more. Later on, of course, these kind of scythes do become important because it's very easy, or easier, to harvest larger areas of grain using the sweeping motion. Hammer. Well, hammer had actually been invented, these call them hand hammers or stone hammers, where you probably used it to whack like that. But if you tie a stick onto it, and then looks a little bit like a tomahawk, then you can use this to pound more effectively. Now the saw is getting to be a little bit more sophisticated yet. That's a stick that can be serrated, but using wood to cut wood is not terribly efficient. So what you'd have is a saw with small pieces of stone in it, and you could use that to saw on wood. A lever, you simply have a stick, you want to lift a stone or whatever, and you simply put the stick in. I'll show you a lever. That might be a little bit more efficient than me trying to show you how a lever works with my hand. Yeah, you see what it is? It's a stick, and you use it. You have to have a fulcrum right here, of course. You pull down on that to lift up something. Drills, take your stick, you work with it so it can turn around, and the drill goes into the ground. Now, as you look at the tools we use today, oh, that's going to be helpful. We look at the tool, yeah, a little bit more of a commercial drill nowadays. Yeah, let me show you a drill bit. Can you see that? And these are made out of metal. Obviously, these aren't wood. But if you have the ability now to twist through the earth, a drill can be very helpful. So if we look at the toolkit, even the toolkit you and I are familiar with today, can we say that these are some of the more fundamental things that are used? Of course, we've advanced them dramatically over the millennia, but these are the kinds of things that we actually have now we can use more efficiently. And can we say so many of our other technical advances, our toolkit, improves because we can build on the kinds of things that are already available in the Neolithic. Sometimes the stick actually ends up being something of a symbol. You know what a scepter is, do you not? A scepter is a symbol of authority that a pharaoh in Egypt might have, king in the Middle Ages might have. It's usually pretty nice, it's decorated. But it's still a stick, isn't it? See if I can get you one here. These are scepters. What I wanted to show you was actually this. And you do see this, that might be a little bit better. You do actually see this in art. Sometimes you'll see a statue of a pharaoh, and he will be holding these items across his chest. This is a crick that you use to snag sheep. Now, if a sheep has an attitude and he wants to go out into town, you're trying to bring that guy back into the pen. It's probably going to be pretty helpful if you don't have to run out and grab him. So he's trying to get away, and you have a stick with a bend at the end. He comes around and you snag usually his back leg, maybe sometimes the front leg as well. And you snag him, that can pull him on the ground. If you manipulate it right, he doesn't get away easily. So you can bring him back to the fold or bring him back to the compound where you want him to be. Can we say when a pharaoh uses this, since this is something very important for the economy, that he's showing he has economic power? Let's look at this. This is a flail. Flails are pretty awful things. It's a kind of a whip. As people from the United States and Westerners, we're familiar with the bullwhip, a long leather strap that you can use to get those cattle moving or draft animals like an oxen or a horse moving by cracking these over their back. Of course, you hit them with it, it can be very painful. These are a kind of whip, and usually they were leather straps coming down here. There'd be something embedded in them. Usually in the ancient world, it would be a piece of bone, sometimes a jagged piece of bone. So when that struck a person, it would actually dig into the flesh. And when you pull it out, that'd pull some flesh with it. So it's not like a bullwhip where it's just the crack of the whip that gives you a great deal of pain. But in this case, it actually tears the flesh. Can we say, in using this kind of thing, Pharaoh is saying, I have economic power, but I also have, can we say civic? Can we say crime and punishment? With this, because I can do very great bodily damage. So the stick, or can we say these are variations of sticks? The variation of sticks gives you an idea. Let me just try a Pharaoh here and see if I can show you one which actually crossed across the chest. Well, that's not working. In any event, they do exist. I have seen them. Can you see one here? That's not terribly good. You can kind of see that. That's the god Horus, by the way. Apparently, Horus does have authority to both have economic and political power, if you will. I like the Bible. I'm certainly not a biblical scholar, but I find this very, very interesting. There's a story in Exodus 7:8-13. And what we're seeing is that, and you're all familiar with Exodus because you listened to the pastor or your reverend during the Sunday school class when you were growing up. So you all know about this. Exodus means that the people of Israel were leaving the condition of slavery in Egypt, and now they're going back to the land of promise, which you and I call Palestine or Israel. Well, according to the Bible, Moses complains because I'm slow of speech. But he's got a brother who's good with the mouth. His name's Aaron. And of course, in the Bible, Moses and Aaron come to see Pharaoh. And they say to Pharaoh, oh, our God, the God of Israel, Yahweh, what do you want to call him, demands that you release my people and let them go, that they may worship me in the wilderness. Of course, Pharaoh says, no way, man, you guys are pretty good economic asset here. This is kind of an interesting story because Aaron's staff, a walking stick, if you're out walking long distances, sometimes the pain of walking on your feet can be pretty bad. So having a walking stick that you can lean on occasion can be very helpful. Oh, great. All right. Got to get you a walking stick. Yeah, sometimes people use canes. So there is a walking stick. You're holding this kind of thing. You walk along with it. And if you're going up and down hill, sometimes it can keep you from slipping. Well, Aaron puts his staff down and turns it to a snake. Not to be outdone, Pharaoh's priests, soothsayers, put their staffs down too. And Aaron's snakes, they put their staffs down, and the staffs turned into snakes. And Aaron's staff is snakes, eats Pharaoh's snakes, Pharaoh's priest's snakes. Now I'm going, well, once again, I'm not terribly good at symbolism, but there's something here that I find kind of interesting. If you want to read between the lines, higher criticism, you might say, well, Aaron's staff represents his religion. And Pharaoh's staffs, Pharaoh's priest's staffs, represent his religion. So even though Pharaoh's snakes outnumber Aaron's snakes represents the correct religion. See, my snake's better than your snake. My staff is better than your staff. My religion is better than your religion. That's one possible interpretation. One thing we see in ancient civilizations is the use of pottery. When I get to this point in a class, if we were meeting in person, I would ask my students, say, well, we find this in virtually every ancient society. It's extremely helpful to have pottery. The question is why? What is so good about a pot? I mean, transportation, I have it right here, very important. You make baskets out of grass, and that's good for transportation. What's so important about pottery? Now, by this time using the semester, the students are looking, when I ask questions, they're saying, I bet he can tell me. And some people are still speculating. Actually, their speculations are really right on. They're not really speculating. They're using their insights to come up with some very, very valuable insights. But others look down and say, oh, and they read it off to me. Well, thank you, you're very good. Transportation, yeah, a pot's going to help you transport. Why do you want to transport in it? You can transport all kinds of things, grain, liquids, wines, beers, oils. And you can't do that in a basket. So you have to have something like this. Storage, yeah. Storage is very helpful. But there is a problem, once again, going back to a basket. If you're storing a basket and there's a mouse in the area, and he comes in, say, is a basket going to slow him down? Chomp, chomp. He's right in there, and he and his 14 sisters and 15 brothers are in there eating your grain. And unfortunately, when they come in, they tend to leave mouse droppings as well. It's not only eat your grain, but they leave a calling card, which is very unpleasant. Is a mouse, a rat for that matter, going to be able to get in through pottery easily? No. He's got to chew his way in. Very often on the pots, going to show you one here. They have lids on them. See, if a mouse came up to, we pick on one here, I guess it doesn't matter which one. If we pick on one of these here, show it up, and the mouse comes here, is he going to have trouble getting in there? Run up the side, hop right in, no problem at all. But if you put a lid on it, then he's got another implement. And the next morning, when the sun comes up and he sees you, oh, he and his brothers and his girlfriends, they all scatter. But vermin protection is a very, very big reason why you have to have pots. So remember, liquids, beer, wine, oil. Olive oil is extremely important in the ancient world. It's a cleansing agent. You clean yourself with it, and you cook with it as well. And you have to store that in some kind of a jar. You can imagine, if you're looking at that, you probably have wine or beer in that. Obviously, you have a spout here to pour. But if you're using that, yeah, you can put wine or beer in that if you want to. That's probably more for grain. Every society finds it useful. It's very easy to make early forms of pottery. You go down to river mud. You got to have a good eye for it. It's too much sand and it doesn't hold together very well. You go down by the river and you see the mud. And the mud is there. And I don't know if you still do this anymore or not. When I was growing up, we had something called Play-Doh. And Play-Doh, you could do all kinds of fun things with it, actually. I think that this isn't used as much anymore because people in your generation are so much more sophisticated than we were. But you take the Play-Doh and you can smash in different things. One thing I used to like to do with it is you just move your hands back and forth. You have a nice little string of Play-Doh. If you use that, if you have river mud down there, and you've taken that and move it down, and now you have a string of mud. But if you take those kind of things and you simply smash down a base, looking something like that, smash down a base made out of mud. We also call advanced mud or high quality mud clay. So you're using the clay down here and you use your hands to make strips of clay, and then you lay them around in a circular pattern. Remember, circles are much more durable than squares are. It's one of the reasons why pottery has a tendency to be round. You don't really see square pots. And in any event, then you have that together and you can kind of push it together. But one of the ways, the good way of doing this is to take your fingers and squish it together. So you have all this little clay areas down here, and you squish them all together and they come together. And of course, we're in hot areas, it doesn't rain very much. You go outside and you let it sit in the sun and it dries and you have a pot. Now that's pretty crude compared to what we have later on. Later on, when you develop the spinning wheel, you actually take some clay and you drop it on the wheel, and it spins around, and then you use your fingers to form the exact shape. This was probably put on a wheel. Okay. These were probably put on a wheel, and then they were spun and you get what you need. So it's a lot better than pinching together clay. Maybe I said that wrong. Is it a potter's wheel? Probably should call it a potter's wheel. Let's try it and make sure I'm telling you right this time. Yeah, I think this is better. This is the potter's wheel. You take the clay, you put it down there. I've never tried to do this. I've never even seen it done except in films. But some of these people, of course, are very, very, very clever, and you have to be somewhat skilled to do this. Once again, you can take that out and you put it in the sun. Well, is that terribly durable? They realize that if you fire this, you put it in a kiln, and then it becomes very, very hard. It's tempting to say it's hard as stone, perhaps not that much, but it's very, very hard and durable. That kind of thing will last hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years. One of the reasons why we have so much pottery that exists from a very long time ago is simply because it becomes extremely durable. Now, how do you make, well, a kiln? Let me tell you essentially what the kiln does. If you have a formal kiln, it's like having a stone or brick fireplace where you have the heat inside, which is kept in there. Modern kilns are probably a little bit misleading because they're a little bit more sophisticated. How about right letters? Yeah, there you got a modern kiln. I'll try ancient and then give it up. Okay, this is more like a hearth or a fireplace where you can actually fire the things. Before you have anything quite this sophisticated, sometimes what you will do is actually get a old piece of pottery. You have to be skilled at this. You take the new pot, you put it in the fire, and then take pieces of old pottery and you kind of lean them on top to keep the heat in. And Grandma has to be pretty good at this. She's probably been doing it since she was a little girl, to keep the heat at the right level, to keep on putting enough twigs in there to fire the kiln. But when you're done with this, and of course it has to dry out, it has to cool off, then you actually have something that's very, very durable. And going back to some of these examples which I showed you earlier, Play-Doh is not what I'm looking for. Some of these are thousands of years old. Now, the way you make these things is the way, well, that's how Mom did it. Mom takes you as a little boy, little girl, and says, this is how you make a pot. You go, oh, this is it. Not only that, this is how you decorate a pot. You and I like artistic changes. We're kind of used to it. Things different. You want to see the same motion picture. You want to see new, different kind of action, different kind of plot. Well, in art, in this time frame, you're used to the same kind of thing. So for generation after generation after generation, sometimes for hundreds of years, for a very lengthy period of time, people do have a tendency to make the pot the same way they've always done it. They decorate it the same way. That's one of the means by which you can use a pot to tell you what culture you're dealing with, because the pots have a tendency to be identical or very similar in composition and in decoration. You say, well, okay, that is the culture, the civilization. Many years ago, I read an article about pre-Columbian America. You know what pre-Columbian America is? That's America when the Indians were here before Columbus, and the Europeans started coming over in large numbers after 1492. It's a good article. I was quite enjoying it. But the author claimed they'd found some pottery in Ecuador, about 5,000 years old. It's very similar to pottery in Japan about 5,000 years ago. Okay, I've never gotten over the shock of that. Really? Was there a connection between Japan and Ecuador 5,000 years ago? I'm not prepared to say that the case is locked, but I'm going to say in many instances you do think about cultural connections when pottery is similar. Sometimes archaeologists use even just shards of pots to help us understand the migration of people, to help us understand who's living there and at what time. Another supposition that sometimes we use is that the more sophisticated the pottery, the more sophisticated the society. If you have something that's relatively crude, you say, well, society must be pretty crude. If you have something that's more advanced, like Egyptian pottery, Mesopotamian pottery, you say society has a tendency to be more advanced. In this case, are we arguing that the fundamental technology and art in a society is the pot? Well, can we say that, however, that as we look at the more sophisticated pottery in the ancient world, the Greeks usually come out on top. We have a few examples over here. Can we say that's pretty sophisticated? Compare that with this? Yeah, a little bit better. Well, this is actually a pretty good argument because we already know that the society in ancient Greece was much advanced. And they have very good pottery, probably the best anywhere in the ancient world. So the theory works fairly well. I want to come back to this when we discuss the ancient Greeks, but I'm a little bit too tempted then to skip it entirely. Notice the Greeks put human figures on this. They're not all stylized. In other words, it's not always the same figure. And we do get the opportunity of looking at Greek pottery to actually have snapshots of what people are doing, how you fight, how you wear clothing, how you dance. I'll come back to that later. I'm sorry. I'm an old man. I cannot resist temptation. It's too tempting to talk about this. Too tempting to talk about this. Yeah. Settlements appear. Yes, we're sedentary. We're now watching our crops. Settlements appear, and now we have the opportunity because we have surplus crops. If you're on the move, the Paleolithic, what you've got's what you're carrying. But now you can put these in pottery, put your surplus grain in pottery, so you have a surplus. A surplus is extremely important to remember because when you have a surplus, you can have specialization. In a hunting and gathering society, the women gather, the guys hunt. That's what you do for a living. That's pretty well everything else. But when you get in agriculture and animal husbandry, the domestication of plants and animals, you do get the opportunity now to have specialization. Now you can take your surplus crops and you can go to somebody who specializes in something else. If you're living in a community, maybe it's very good to have somebody who makes bricks. Maybe the lady down the lane makes better pots than the ladies up on this part of the lane. You can get blacksmiths. You can get carpenters. You can get specialization because of surplus. Let me come back to that again in just a minute when we get into cities themselves. The surplus cross does allow you for specialization. And specialization, now you can have people doing different things, not just one thing. And now you can get, in specialization, you can get more advances in art. When you can write, you get literature. This allows you to have civilization. Well, population growth. I've seen estimates as the number of people that some archaeologists and anthropologists believe was a number of people in the Paleolithic. It's not large numbers, just a few tens of thousands. I'd like to believe there's more than that, but I'm not in a position to argue with their learned estimates. But when you're in a sedentary society and you're not moving around, you can have 2 children, you can have 3 children. You see, we do have a tendency to see in agricultural societies high birth rates for children because a child is actually an economic asset. Remember, hunter-gathering, child is not always an economic asset. But sometimes even small children can do something for you. Sometimes a little girl can take her little stick out and she can start throwing that around and chase the birds away so the birds don't eat the crops. When you have chickens, you can even have the little girl go over and get the eggs from the chickens. And you don't have to carry her around. So she becomes an economic asset. Since you're not moving around, you don't have the problem of saying, oh, by the way, Grandpa, I'm sorry you can't get across the river. We'll see you on the other side because you have to die. Now you have the opportunity to have somebody there with the surplus crops. They don't always have to be producing, but now you have the opportunity of old age. By our standards, these people aren't really old. Not by our standards. Remember, we have people living in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's very common. Now, old age to them might have been 50s and 60s, but it's still a lot better than 30s. Can we say old people have more perspective? I know I'm a pretty old guy now. A lot of people say, oh, by the way, when you get old, you get wise. No. Maybe I'm not speaking to everybody else. I'm speaking about me. I get old. I don't get wise. I just get old. I made mistakes when I'm young. I make mistakes when I'm old. However, be that as it may, you do have the opportunity to have a longer memory. You can remember, talk to Grandma. Now, these can be things that are kind of fun. Well, I remember when I was a little girl and we heard these stories. Do you get a longer corporate memory? Do you have the ability now to pass on your folklore because you have a greater age and greater memory? It can have practical reasons. Let's say you have to make a terribly challenging decision. The rains haven't come or the river hasn't risen for a while. And you say, well, we can stay here and hope it'll rain next year, or the rivers will rise, or we can move on. That can be an extremely important decision. Go to Grandma or Grandpa. You remember anything about that? Oh, yeah. When I was a little girl, I was 2 years about like this, didn't have any rain. And, well, next year it rained. Does that mean it's going to rain next year? No. But that is potential valuable information. So sometimes these people can have practical ability to pass on knowledge. Old age makes that more likely and more possible. Now, hunters and gatherers, they were out in the Paleolithic. They're eating different kinds of grain and different kinds of fruits and berries and tubers, and they're catching different kind of animals. Now you're in a sedentary society and you grow that which is the most valuable to you. Sometimes barley, but usually wheat. And you use that to grind it. You get a stone here and you get your wheat here, put it down there, and it takes a lot of work. We do believe there's a tendency for women to do this, so women are pretty buff back then. Heavy work. You grind that down to a kind of flour, and they don't have the ability to put yeast in yet, so it rises. It's a little bit like fire cakes. You just take flour and water and you throw it on the heat, and then you eat it. But the point is this: you're eating a less varied diet, and people do go down in size. In some areas, where during the Paleolithic, that the men were 5'9". Later on, the same area during the Neolithic, men are now 5'4". That's a considerable drop in size, probably because of less nutrition in a more repetitive diet. Now, the same place does not mean the same people. You got a family of basketball players living in here, and then you have people coming in a different community. They can bring in a different level of gene pool. So even though they're the same place, they don't have to be the same people. They can be. They can be the same gene pool. They don't have to be. However, in almost every case, comparing Paleolithic areas in the Middle East with Neolithic areas, in almost every case, people are shorter. Remember I talked earlier, I was talking about 5'10". Now we have people that were 5'7" going down to 5'3" or 5'5", but there can be quite a big drop. This is true throughout the time frame we're going to be discussing. We're talking about time frames, eras. Let's pick on the Middle Ages. Eras when people had more food and more varied diet, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about the Middle Ages. We do have a tendency to see people a little bit taller. But sometimes, if you have harder times, more wars, famines, plagues, people that tend to be shorter. So it goes up and down somewhat. But can we say overall, we are seeing both in men and women, remember we have women over here too, we're 5'4", drop down to 5 foot even, that now we're seeing a shorter human being. I do even yet have a tendency to think of ancient people like Roman legionnaires and medieval knights being these, buff guys. I'm sure they're in great shape, quite have a great build. But in going to museums, and anytime you get to Europe or any place that you can see medieval armor or Roman armor for that as examples, you'll find they're shorter. Remember, from the first times I was in museums in Europe, you walk in, you see, here's a knight. Here's knight's armor, and they have them about eye high with you. Then you look down and find they're on a pedestal that's several inches high. They're shorter people. Something just came to. Let's talk about the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You don't have to go to Europe. Go to Europe if you can. If not, go to New York City. Whoa! Man, you're going to have the time of your life because that place is absolutely gorgeous. The Metropolitan Museum of Art is very, very, very high on my list of places to visit. They do have an excellent armor. This is medieval armor. And as we look, some of those, this is the center display showing what it would look like are men deploying into battle. They have other armor on the side. And I'm not saying everybody there is a small person, but I'm going to say as you look at the armor on the side, notice this man is probably, 5'10", maybe 6 feet tall. He's a pretty tall man for his generation. But look at these guys next to him. That's more typical. So it is wise to remember that people do get shorter because of a less varied diet. There's other issues, hygiene as well, comes into play. Now we get into cities. Sometimes the oldest city is often considered to be Jericho, or at least it's among the oldest cities. One of the reasons why it's easy to remember Jericho, going back to what the pastor, priest, or reverend was telling you in Sunday school, when you're a little boy or little girl, remember Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. There's even a song, Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. It is very important. At the end of the Exodus, when the Israelites, or the Hebrew people, have gone across the Sinai Peninsula, and now they're coming into Palestine. It's also a modern city. Let's see if I can get you ancient Jericho. We normally say that you need a population of about 3,000 people. That's what geographers are saying, to have a truly sophisticated society. That's where you have enough people to have the various kinds of occupations you would assume. Jericho probably didn't have that many people. Probably had about 2,000 people in it. That doesn't mean we don't have specialization, it's just not as advanced as a 3,000 population. I have been there, I got on a tour. It's really quite interesting. You hear about towns, well, I'm thinking about cities. This is a small place. I'm trying to remember, was it 17 acres or something like that? I was a baseball player when I was a kid. I had a good arm, but I didn't have a great arm. My brother, Melvin, 6 years older than I am, had a good arm. He had a really good arm. He liked to throw rocks across barns and see how far he could throw, and snowballs above trees coming down the street. I bet in his heyday, when he was a young man, teenager, he could have thrown a rock across this thing. Not terribly big. Number of mysteries here. They had walls around it, which I was showing you earlier. Walls, who are they defending themselves from? Some people argue, well, maybe there's floods. But the point is this, the Jordan River is nearby, so you have irrigation. You have wheat, water, wheat. You have the potential of having cities. So, very early on, 8 to 7,000 BC. Up in Turkey, Anatolian Peninsula, they have what they call Catalhuyuk. There's probably an umlaut there, so I'm probably misrepresenting it for you. But why would you have it? Now, there's no walls here. There's like streets. Let me get to Catalhuyuk and see if I can show you what I'm talking about. It didn't have walls around it, just a number of streets. There was obsidian nearby, and there was a kind of stone that chips very nicely to make instruments. So that's probably the reason why it existed. Jericho, crossed the river, crossed the Jordan, usually river crossings are places where you tend to see cities grow up. So that's another very early city. I'm wrong, there are no umlauts here. Jarmo, I want to mention Jarmo to you because Jarmo is in modern day Iraq. But the thing about Jarmo, which is helpful to remember, is that Jarmo has been one of the more fertile of the economic, shall we say, archaeological places. In other words, in doing excavations there, archaeologists have found examples of pottery, no doubt. They've also found examples of animals. So you get an idea as to when, at what time, various kinds of animals were domesticated. So Jarmo is a very important archaeological site. And I'm getting embarrassed because I'm running out of time. Oh, I'm always behind. It's always the same thing. I never get as far as I want to be. Haven't quite finished with the Neolithic, but I want to come back and readdress that in our next discussion. In the meantime, remember, take good notes. You'll need them for you'll need it for the first test. In the meantime, whatever else you're doing, have a great day, and I'll speak with you next time.